Hey, what's going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. In the video that I have for you guys today, we are going to be going over farmlands. That's right, farmlands. We are going to be designating what areas of our map belong to our player and what areas are going to be up for sale and what areas cannot be bought and sold. Okay, and a really simple way to do that. So if we look at what we have here now, okay, let's go up to let's go to that little blue arrow key there, the little, or not arrow key, a little pencil looking thing. Oh boy, look at that. Okay, you can see, make sure we're on farmlands, which we are. Okay, you can see farmland there. That's an awful lot going on there. And what you're seeing there is, since we made this our new mod from game based off the US map, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the original farmlands map from the base game US map. Okay, so quickly, let me go over a few things here with you. All right. The one thing that we're going to be working with, let's go into our mod map folder, and in your map folder, you're going to look for a farmlands.xml. Okay, now you're probably not going to see it. And if you don't, go to the base game, navigate over to the map US, find that farmlands.xml and copy it over to your map, okay? To your mod map, okay? And then when you open that up, you'll see that you have 62 listings there, and we don't need 62. All right, so let's go over this starting at the top, and I'll show you what's going on here. Now you can see that the address is pointing towards our base game. All right, so we don't want that. I want to make this point to my local copy, which is just map data. Okay. Ooh, how did you get down there, you little bugger? Get back up there. All right, so I'm going to make it point towards map data. All righty, so now I know that everything will show up okay. All right, now the next thing in line here is the number of channels. Okay, so the number of channels is stipulating how many farmlands we have available to work with. All right, and since that's set at 6, I have 63 farmlands that I can use. Now a 6-bit is actually 64, but we always minus 1. So that gives us 63 available properties to work with. Okay, so that's how many farmlands I could have. Now the next thing you see there is price per acre. That's actually hectares or whatever it is, but let's just call it acre. All right, so price per acre is $60,000. All right, so what happens if you have like a and this basically, this applies. This 60,000 applies at $60,000 or euros, however you want it. It applies to every single farmland. All right. And like I said, the bigger these lands get, the more expensive they get. So the more acreage, the more they cost. And you know very well that these things can get into the millions easily. All right. So what happens if you have a property that's a real piece of crap? I mean, it's just a junky property. It's got a giant lake on it, or maybe it's just filled with rocks and tree, just all sorts of stuff. It's just really bad farmland. And it's definitely not worth $60,000 per acre. It's just not. Okay. Well, if you look at farmland, of all your farmlands, you can see we have a price scale here. All right. So a price scale of 1 to 1 is basically $60,000. All right, so maybe you had that crappy farmland, it's only worth half as much. You can make that price scale of 0.5. Now you're at 30,000 per acre. Okay, or maybe it's just prime real estate, really good real estate. You can move that to 2, and now you're at 120,000 per acre. Or maybe it's just slightly crappy, you can go to 0.9, or it's just slightly better, you can go to 1.1. Okay, so you get the idea. So you can adjust the price scale up or down accordingly. All right, so the next thing on the list there is the NPC name. Now that's the actual NPC that owns that particular property. All right. For the default farm property, it doesn't matter. Even though the player owns it, it doesn't matter what it says there, okay? And that very next line is stipulating that this is the default farm property where it equals true. All right, so for some reason, you got a little bit ahead of yourself and you already started coloring everything in and didn't realize that your default farm property is usually ID number 1. you can change this. You can take this default farm property and you can move it down to like 5. So if you made a boo-boo and 5 is now the default farm property, you can do that. Alrighty. So now keep in mind your NPCs goes up to, I believe it only goes up to 14 for the US. And you don't want to go any higher than that because each one of these NPCs, these numbers, they're associated with like a picture and a name and all that stuff. So you can't go up to like NPC 56 because it doesn't exist. All right. So keep that in mind. Try not to go any higher than 14. All right. So now we have one more option that we see there, which is show on farmland screen, which is equals false. And what that's telling it is that particular property and the BGA sits on that property is that when you go into your game and you look at the map and you're looking at the farmland screen and you want to buy certain lands, that particular land is not going to show up as an option. Okay, so this works both ways, and I'll show you how this works, okay? When you buy the BGA that's on that land, you're buying the land that goes with it, right? So it's kind of like a bundle deal, all right? And that goes the exact opposite as well, that you could have it that there's a building on your land and you'll own that building once you buy the land. It comes with the land. All right. Believe it or not, it's completely possible to buy a piece of land, but yet you don't own the building that's on it. You have to shell out even more money to buy the building that's on it. All right. And sometimes I'll adjust my price scale accordingly. Right. So you can even see the price scale for this one's at 0. Right. Because you're not really paying for the land. You're paying for the placeable that's on there, the BGA. But if I include buildings in with it, I would do this the exact opposite. Say I've got all these really high value buildings on my land. I might change that to a 1.5 or a 1.3, or, you know, you're paying extra for all those buildings that are on the land. Okay. And I can show you really quickly how this is taken care of. All right. So let's find some placeables. All right. Let's go to data placeables. I'm in the base game, by the way. I'm going to go to placeables. We're going to go to the BGA. Which BGA was that? Not sure. 250 or 500. Let's open that. All right. We'll open this. Okay. And if you look right here where it says base, you see something that says bought with farmland equals true. Okay. So that means if that's sitting on a piece of farmland somewhere, right? When you buy the farmland, you're also buying this BGA. The BGA goes with it. All right. Now this isn't the BGA, obviously, that's sitting on that land. Maybe that's a 250. I'll have to check that one. But if you go through here and you look at all these different BGAs, or you look at some of these files, you'll find the one where it says the exact opposite. Let's see where base is. This also says bought with farmland equals true. Not sure which one it is, but anyhow, you get the idea. That's what's going on there. Okay. Just so you have an idea of what's going on going into this. All right. So now we did change our address. Our address is pointing to something local. The next thing you want to do is go into your map.xml. All right. Now find your line in here that says farmlands. Make sure that also points to your local copy of the farmlands, that farmlands.xml. If it doesn't, it's going to load up the base game. You know, it's not going to look the way, however you color your farmlands in, it's not going to look that way when you start it if you don't adjust this address. So make sure that this file address is correct and it points towards that copy. All right. Now, the very last thing we want to do before we get into this is we're going to go into our data folder, scroll down a little bit, and make sure we actually have something right here that says info layer farmland.grle. Okay. So now that we have all those things together, we know what's going on. All right. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to look at my farmlands real quick. Now, remember when I said the number of channels, that's 6? Will give us 63 farmlands that we can work with. Okay. So say you have a bigger map and you want to have more available farmlands, or maybe you have a 2 kilometer map, a default map size, but you still have more than 63 fields or 63 farmlands. I'm sorry. Well, you would adjust this number of channels. you would adjust that up to the next value, which is 7, and that would give you 128 available farmlands, or 127. Okay, so that's how you get more farmlands. If you need more farmlands, that's how you do it. And then you can go up as high, you can go up to 8, which is 255. And I haven't gone 9 yet. That's an awful lot of fields, man. If you're doing like 500 and some fields, you got your work cut out for you. Alrighty. So the next thing I want to show you is if you go to the map.i3d. Now, instead of opening it, open that up inside of your text editor, right? And I'm going to hit Control F, and I'm going to search for info layer. I'll find next. No. There's where I want to be. Okay, so now this is the this info layer that you see here. This is exactly what we're going to be working with in the map editor. Now, where it says name equals farmland, when you look in the editor, see this info layer name where it equals farmland, you can change that to anything you want. So if you have something that works easier for you, you can change that. Okay. Now, the number of channels in here isn't the same as your farmlands.xml. And there, the number of channels dictates how many fields or farmlands you have available. This here dictates how many of those checkboxes you have available, okay? And you'll see that if you look over here now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those boxes that are available, okay? That's what that is stipulating in there. Alrighty, now where it says group, where it says name equals lands, if you look over here, okay, these here, you can change that. You probably don't need to, but this is the group that it's referring to, okay? And if you have a bigger map and you have, like, say 127 fields on it, if you have more than 63, this is where you want to do that, because these are all the options that show up in your drop-down list. All right, so basically you would need to duplicate that line, and then you would change, this would go to 64. Oops. That would change, anyhow, you get the idea. That would change to 64, and then you would also need to change the value to 64. All right, the value is what matters. This is what's actually keeping track of the value of the farmland itself. This here is just for you, so you know what you're looking at, something that says farmland ID 64. All right, so I just wanted to put that out there. So if you have a bigger map and you need to add more fields as far as the drop down list goes, this is the way that you would do it. You would add them in there, and then you would just save the i3d, and then you could load it up inside your editor. Okay, so now back in the editor, where we have this we have our info layer highlighted there. We're on farmland screen. You can see this whole collage of colors we got going on here. Well, we don't need this. So we're going to start over with something here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my brush size, my radius, and I'm going to change that to something big, like 500. Okay. And then I'm going to go back down to my info layer here, and I'm going to check every one of these boxes. All right. And what that's doing is it's picking my highest possible value of all my farmlands. All right. And every one of these boxes, what that's stipulating or what that's dictating is this is going to be my non-purchasable land, right? So there's always land in your game that you can't buy. All right. Well, this is how you tell it what land you don't want to be able to buy. Okay. And that's by checking every one of those boxes. So if you ever, the idea runs through your head, or the thought or the question that, like, hey, what value, represents like non-purchasable land, right there, just check all those boxes and you're good. All right. So the very next thing I did is I colored the entire map. That's why I made my brush size bigger. I colored the entire map that color for non-purchasable land. And the reason for that is when it comes to farmlands, you need to make sure that every last pixel of your map is covered, literally every last one. You can't have a single open pixel on that, a single open, meaning not colored in, or else it's going to throw an error. You definitely want to make sure that they're all colored in. So I always start by coloring in the entire map, non-purchasable, and then I'll come back and start coloring in the lands that are purchasable. Okay, so you can see here is our our default farm property. And then from here, it's as simple as just figuring out what amount of land you want included with that property. Okay. And then just left click and you can color everything in. Now right click will delete, but I don't recommend doing it because it deletes literally everything. So you don't want to do that. And I also recommend not doing Control Z because for undo, there's always the option that it's going to take a pixel away from somewhere else. This used to happen on FS19, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen here. So try to not hit Control Z. If you need to fix a mistake or delete something, just go to the adjacent property, right? And in this case, it would be the purple, the non-viable, and hit Control R, hovering over top of that, and that will select that. All right, and then just color that in, go back over your property, Control R again, and there you go. You could also select through the drop-down list if you need to. All right, so now as you're adding this, now thing to keep in mind is to be careful of how much, you add as far as your property, because the more you add, the more expensive it gets. All right, now you can see what I'm doing here is I'm actually including the roadway in with my property, okay? Now that's going to be a personal preference. Now the one thing that it's doing, not the only thing, but the one thing it's doing is it's making the land more expensive because I'm adding more area to it, right? But the reason that I'm doing this is, like, say in the winter season when it starts snowing and stuff like that, and if these roads are close enough to your property, you want to be able to come through and you want to be able to plow the roads. All right. Well, it's not going to allow you to plow any roads that you don't already own. If you don't own that property, you can't plow the roads. And that seems to be one of the big things that I get from a lot of players when they play my maps is, I really want to be able to plow these roads and I can't plow them all. And, it is what it is. All right. So if the road runs close enough to the property, I will include that with the property. So this way the player is able to come through and he's able to plow the roads as long as he owns them. And that goes for just about every other property. Now, if I run into a scenario where there's a road that goes through non-purchasable land, then I'll make that part of the mask where the indoor-outdoor mask where it's already plowed and you just don't have to worry about it. Okay, that's usually the way that I handle that. So like I said, just make sure you don't miss any areas when you come through and you're coloring all this in. And this is going to be farmland ID number 1 is what this is going to turn out to be. Okay. And this goes for just about, any other property. If you have other properties you want to start penciling in, just go over to your drop down list there, pick number 2 and start coloring. All right. Now, if you guys got a little bit ahead of yourself, now you can see where we had the fields picked out here, right? If I was to start this, try to test this in game without stipulating those farmlands, without coloring in those farmlands, that would throw an error. Okay, so if you got ahead of yourself and you have other fields somewhere on your map, you're going to need to make sure that those fields are covered by a farmland, okay? And not just non-viable property. You want to actually have an actual farmland over top of it, all right? If not, it's going to throw an error. So as far as the farmland goes, that's really it. Like I said, just be careful when you're putting everything in. Try to keep everything nice and neat. Try to keep your land sizes fairly small, or else things are going to just be really, really expensive. All right. And then the one thing I could have done here too also is try to see, and here's the difference, and I'll show you this one too. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit because I'm thinking of a few different things at one time. So this property here, I can actually make it that it ends, right there. Well, I kind of took the house out of the picture, but you get the idea. I'll include that back in. But what this does is, I can give this a different farmland value, and then you can, it gives you the incentive to, maybe want to buy the land right next to you. And in this way, you can expand your farm property, right? So you can make it a little bit bigger. It's up to you. A lot of this is going to be personal preference. Do you want the player to own all this land to start with? or do you want him to have to buy this little section of land so he can expand his farm? Okay, and the same thing goes with the fields. All right, so you can have each farmland can contain 1 field, 2 fields, 3 fields, or no fields. It doesn't have to have a field on it. All right, you can buy a piece of property just for the sake of owning it. All right, so some guys like to make each farmland, like each field is covered by a farmland. This way you're buying, each field individually. Like here, if you were to buy, if this wasn't the available for like the default farmland and you were just purchasing this property, you would get 3 fields that come with that property, right? Okay. And then when I get into really big properties, like when I have huge fields all over the place that aren't tied to a particular property, if the field's big enough, I will make that one farmland all by itself, because the field is already ginormous. So it's going to cost a lot just for that field. So I try not to bundle too many fields together with my farmlands when they're bigger fields. Smaller fields, you can throw 2 or 3 of those into a property and it's fine. Divide it up any way that you want. If you just want one of these fields to be available, then just make one available. But that is it. That's literally all there is to farmlands. It's not complicated at all. Just make sure that every surface of your map is covered. Make sure all your fields are covered. And that is it. So once you get that far, you can go ahead and you can click save. And at this point, we should be ready to test in game. We can try this out and make sure everything works inside of our game. So let's get that fired up really quickly and we'll see what we get. Okay, and if you remember, when I put my fields in there, when I was all done, one of my fields should show up as wheat, one of them should show up as seed bed, and one of them should show up in some sort of like plowed state. If it doesn't, then you know automatically that you have a problem with the ownership of your field or your farmland, that you don't actually own that. Okay, so let's just check, make sure we don't have any errors. All right, I can see wheat right off the bat, which is good, and I can see 2 darker fields, which means I own both of those right off the bat. Let's go up to that and it just say player. Okay, and well, it says you, owned by you, ready to harvest wheat, which is really nice. All right, everything else is looking good, looking good. Let's go up, check our other 2 fields, and I can see them both there, and they look pretty good. All right, now if you look right here, you can see, look how big the space is between the fields. This is why I was trying to tell you, like even these fields here look really big for a starting farm. On some maps, some maps that they're really tiny. Depends how big you like your fields. I just wanted to get the point across there that to remember when you're working on these things in the editor, they look much smaller than what they actually are. So this is a pretty big gap in between fields. So I might want to come back and I might want to, cover this up a little bit, or close it up a little bit, not cover it. Well, both actually. All right, so this is just testing. This is why we test to see if there's any changes. All right, the other thing that you want to look for is when the crops grow in your field, like say if I didn't own this land, I might see a small section of wheat here and then the rest is corn. And if you see something like that, that means that you didn't actually cover your field entirely. It's not completely covered with those overlays. When we're moving the overlays around to do our field, that particular field is not completely covered. So you either need to erase part of the field to trim it back a little bit, or you need to extend the overlay to cover that strip. You'll come across it, trust me. It might not make a whole lot of sense now, but at some point during your gameplay, you're going to realize that part of your field has corn, and there's going to be a tiny little strip there that has wheat or something else, or you're going to find something that you can't mow down for some reason. You'll see it. Eventually it'll come up and you'll see it. Just keep in mind that that's what you need to do. You need to go back into your editor and either erase a very small part of the field or go into the field editor and extend that overlay. All right, so looking at everything looks like it checked out okay. No problems at all. Like I said, that was really simple for Farmlands. Just double check all your file paths. Make sure they lead back to your local to your local copy of like the farmlands.xml and the info layer farmland. Really quickly, we'll check our map here, and we can see that everything showed up as far as our fields 1, 2, 3. That all looks good. We go into farmland. We only have that one farmland that I stipulated, that number 1. And you can see the value of that alone is worth, over $400,000. So that's a pretty decent chunk of land for a starting farm. All right. But, it depends on how you want to do this. So far, we're looking really good. Everything's checking out just the way we want it to. And that's it. So please remember that if you guys are finding these videos helpful in any way, to be kind and subscribe. It really helps me out. And with that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.